everyone, and welcome to our book trip live chat. If you're looking for an escape filled with handsome billionaires, sultry romance set in sizzling Miami, or royal affairs, then you've come to the right place. Today, we're thrilled to be chatting with USA Today bestselling Harlequin Sire author Janice Maynard about her new book, Minding Her Boss's Business. And it is the first in the Monteros Dynasty series. So thanks so much for joining us today, Janice. We're excited to have you.
Thank you, Alyssa. I've looked forward to being here.
I also wanted to let everyone know that we're giving away a copy of the book on Booktrib, so stop by after the chat and enter to win. And Janice, we have a lot of great questions coming through, but before we begin, do you think you could tell us a little bit more about Minding Her Boss's Business for the people who aren't too familiar?
Of course. I do two different kinds of series for Harlequin. One is the Kavanaugh series I'm working on that's a family of brothers. But then Harlequin also does what they call multi-author series, where they invite authors to participate in a storyline. So I was very honored to be asked to do the first book in the Montoro series, which is Minding Her Boss's Business. It's about a royal family whose ancestors were ousted by a dictator somewhere around World War II. And then now things are peaceful and they want the royal family to come back, but the royal family has a really good life in Miami, doesn't really want to go back. So it's a lot of fun.
So we have some great questions, as I mentioned. Audrey is wondering, you're a novel machine. Love all of your books. How many do you usually write in a year?
Thank you, Audrey, for that. Uh, Interestingly enough, that's a tough question. Right now, I'm doing 4 to 5 a year. Um, Beware of what you want, beware of what you ask for. Now suddenly I have a really tight publishing schedule, but I love it. It means I can't take much time off, but it sort of keeps the creative juices flowing, and I always have a deadline.
Great. That's a lot.
Yes.
um, Audrey's also asking, with a busy writing schedule, do you ever find time to read yourself? Are there any books that you like to read in particular?
One of the things that has suffered the most with this really tight writing schedule is my personal reading. Um, I've been an avid reader since I learned how to read in kindergarten or first grade. Every year, my New Year's resolution recently has said, read more of my bedside table stack. So it's true. Oftentimes I'm writing up until 11 in the evening. I tend to be really productive at night. So my personal reading has suffered. As far as what I like to read, I love Susan Elizabeth Phillips, Lori Foster. I love historicals, although I don't think I could ever write one, but I love to read them.
Would you ever try to write a historical?
I might. I have a husband who really is into research, so he could probably help me out there. Um, I'd love to do that one day.
That'd be fun. We'd like to read it.
Thank you.
Alex is wondering, did you immediately know that you wanted the title of your book to be Minding Her Boss's Business? Were there alternatives before choosing this one?
Good question. And this is a question I actually get asked a lot. Out of the 35 books I've written, maybe 2 of my titles I've gotten to keep. Harlequin has a fabulous editorial and marketing team who work really hard to hit those buzzwords that for some reason really work for the sales force. So in this instance, I did not pick my title. And also they were looking at titles that would go together as for the whole series, since they were working with numerous authors. Good question.
Which are the ones that you picked that you got to keep?
One of my very earliest books I wrote for Kensington was called Tent for Two, and they liked that title and kept it. In fact, you can find that on Amazon or eBay for some ridiculous price, but I sort of cringed when I look back at it. I hope my writing has improved since then.
Becca is wondering, when writing a book, do you start with the plot or the characters and then build from there?
I am a character person first. I I usually have either the hero or the heroine in mind when I start, and some vague idea of what I want to happen. I used to fantasize about sitting at a sidewalk cafe with my pen and my paper and making out little notes about this great book. I can't do it. Until I actually start writing the book, I usually don't know what's going to happen. I know that sounds weird, but that's the way it is.
That makes sense. Allie is wondering, how would you describe your writing style to someone who might not have read any of your books yet?
That's a good question. Early on, I was writing some what they called erotic romance for NAL. Now, those books would be considered pretty tame, but at the time it was sort of, cutting edge sexy. A comment that I received over and over again was that my books were really sexy but sweet, which I took to be a compliment. One lady told me I didn't want to read your book because I thought it would be gross, but she said I read it because I met you and I really liked it. So, and of
Oh, that's
course,
so nice.
yeah, of course, my Harlequin Desires are not as sexy as those early books, although they definitely do have sexy scenes.
Definitely. Great question from Marley. If you could unpublish one of your books and change something in the story, would you?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Tough one.
I had one book that I wrote where the heroine actually had a sexual relationship with more than one man, not at the same moment, but in the same period of time. This was an idea that my editors, and this was not Harlequin, somebody else, we had sort of worked on this idea, and it's the only romantic suspense I ever did, titled Mating Game. As a I had trouble with it because that was so not me. I married my high school sweetheart. So afterward, I thought, I'm not sure I'm too happy with the way. I was happy with the way the book was written, but it was very difficult for me to write a book with a woman who had more than one love interest. Although it was my idea, they didn't make me do it. But if I wanted to undo something, I might go back and undo that one.
Okay. Um, w- Susan is wondering, what's the best place to read or to do your writing? Is there a spot in particular that you find inspiring?
I have a really nice office that I never sit in. I tend to be a sit in the recliner with my laptop writer. Now that the days have gotten warmer and nicer, we have a small but beautiful back porch, and I'll go out and sit in the lounge chair with my laptop. So it's very peaceful. You can hear the birds singing and the trees rustling in the wind. But I'm
Right,
not
that
a
sounds
sit at the
nice.
desk writer.
Right. Chase is wondering, when did you write your first story? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Uh, I I went to a very progressive elementary school. I guess progressive is the right word. We had a science fair like most schools do, but in addition to the science fair, our school had an arts and crafts fair alongside the science fair. So students could write short stories, paint pictures, enter them. I wrote a riveting story called The Princess and the Robbers when I was in third grade. Won a red ribbon for it, and I thought I had arrived. But yeah, I knew even back then that making up stories was something I loved to do. In junior high school and boring classes, I would write short stories and pass them around to my friends to read. So it goes way back.
You should publish some of those.
I don't think so.
Marley's wondering, if you could live in any book you've read over the years, which would it be and why?
Ah, wow. I have a list of top 5 books ever, and I have to confess to being a huge Diana Gabaldon fan who wrote the book Outlander, which has now been made into a cable television series. What I so love about her books is that she has the ability to draw you into a scenario that's completely fictional. Most of us would say that couldn't really happen, but it is so real and so just amazing that you just want to keep reading. It's one of the few books that, I would read 10 minutes at lunchtime and 10 minutes at the doctor's office because I couldn't bear to put it down. So I would love to be part of that world.
Great. Lexi is wondering, what are some tips that you've come across that you use to overcome writer's block?
It's called paying the bills. Um, I Writer's block tends to happen to me when I don't have a whole day to write. For instance, today I knew I had to get ready for this chat. I had a couple of phone calls earlier, and I sometimes will say, well, I'll write tomorrow and I'll do all my, businessy kind of stuff today. But that's sort of an excuse. Usually, if I can convince myself to turn on the laptop and sit down and get started, I pull myself into my own story and it's okay. So it's a
Right.
lot of times just a matter of, even if you're typing a weird sentence that doesn't mean anything, your fingers tell your brain, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be working right now. And it happens.
Just get it down.
It does.
Right.
But when you have multiple deadlines, there's not much time for writer's block.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure. Great question from Chase. Do you get sentimental when you have to say goodbye to a character, or when you're done writing a book?
Definitely. I wrote a series a couple of years ago called The Men of Wolf Mountain. I created this whole family of seven brothers and this whole scenario where they grew up together sort of in seclusion. As I wrote each book, each of those guys and the women that they came across became more and more real to me. And when it got to the end, I was like, oh, I really was sorry I hadn't made it nine brothers or seven brothers and two sisters. But it was real hard for me to say goodbye to the Men of Wolf Mountain.
Right. Emily Santo asks, how much time do you spend writing each book? Do you have an outline or just write and see where it goes?
Now that Well, let me back up and say, before you've sold your first book, nobody will buy a book from you unless you have the thing finished. Because a lot of people write a chapter, but a publisher is not going to buy a chapter based on you telling them that you can do this. The good thing about being multi-published is that now I sell usually on a couple of paragraphs because I've written enough books for Harlequin that they trust that I will turn in what I say I will turn in. My Harlequin deadlines in the last 3 years have been about 10 weeks apart, and that's 50,000
Wow.
words for a Harlequin Desire. 1,000 word day is a minimum. Sometimes if I go on a writer's retreat, I'll do 3 or 4,000 words a day. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, it sort of depends. I have a life
No time
too,
to
so that
relax.
gets in the way.
Right. Kate is wondering, before you got published, how did you deal with rejection?
Ooh. I I remember one of the early rejections I got. The book that came before Tent for Two was called Sweetheart, and honestly, it was a very, very mild romance novel. I was really proud of it, and everybody was excited, and the television station came and did a story. It was all fun. Then we had a very conservative college in our area. I got a letter from a professor there whom I think we had a mutual friend, and the mutual friend had said, oh, my friend wrote a book. So this woman got it, and she hated it. And she wrote me a letter about how people like me were responsible for the downfall of young people in America. So I
Wow.
cried and I
Oh my
cried, and my husband said, you're so crazy, throw that away. But
goodness. Right.
we tend to,
Oh wow.
yeah, yeah. Trust me, if you're going to make it any distance at all in this business, you have to have really thick skin. Because even now, um, when I'm published and I'm working with the same editor regularly, if she tells me something's not working in my story, I can't let my feelings get in the way. I have to trust her instincts as an editor and, be a professional and be a big girl and do what I need to do.
Do you think you're able to build that tough skin over time, or is it something that you sort of have to have inherently
It would
starting
help if
out?
you had it at the beginning. I suspect the problem is that many writers are very emotional people. We think a lot, we're into introspection a lot and second guessing things. So even to say that I have developed a thick skin may not entirely be true, um, because it does hurt when somebody doesn't get your work. It can be very painful, and I'm constantly amazed by people on Amazon that post reviews. If I read a book and don't like it, I just get rid of the book. Um, I don't take a portion of my life and go, vent about it online, but
Right.
people are different.
Right. This sort of goes into Alex's question, how you deal with harsh criticism. Do you read your own reviews?
I have been known to. um, Sometimes it helps. This is kind of crazy, but sometimes it helps to go read, pick some famous author that you like and go read their reviews. And if those really famous people are getting snarky reviews, I think, okay, maybe it's not so bad. But yes, I can't,
Right.
I
That's great.
can't help it. I have to look at them sometimes anyway.
I don't blame you. Sure. Um, Romances in the workplace are always a touchy subject. What made you want to write a book about this topic? Says Becca.
Becca. This actually was part of what all of the authors together agreed for this series. In my book, the Department of Commerce and had sent people over to America to convince this royal family to come back to the country of Alma. And one of the women who worked alongside this diplomat was asked to come along. Um, Sorry, my screen went blank, so I'm adjusting my password here. Um, she she did not work in the office with him back where they came from, but she was a very valuable asset, and he asked for her to be on the team. So even though back where they lived, they were not actually working side by side. They definitely were when they came to Miami to take care of this.
Right. Okay. Um, what advice would you give to someone who wanted to write a romance novel? Asked Emily Santo.
Emily, that's a great question. I, in the beginning, I think one of the most helpful things you can do is to finish a book. I can remember going to early writers conferences where I heard a lady say she wrote three or four before she sold one. And I thought, well, that's crazy. If I didn't sell the first one, I would just quit. Um, Turns out that wasn't what I did. I actually wrote three books um, before I sold that third one. And fortunately, the editor went back and bought the first two. But to say that you want to be a writer and get published, the first hurdle is actually finishing a book. It's very challenging, it's very difficult. And when you get to the end of that process, you say, wow, I did this and this was hard. So if I can do this, surely I can try to sell it. And after that, of course, you're dealing with people reading your work and, you know, commenting on it, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Marley's wondering, who are some of your greatest creative influences?
Hmm. I'll cheat a little bit and say part of my creative influences are places. I'm really drawn to settings. Some people say that setting can almost be an extra character in your book. That is certainly true for me. I've used a lot of real settings around the South, which is where I live. You can probably tell that from my accent. But I've also created a couple of worlds that I have enjoyed creating. Um, so when I go places and when I see things, I find that you sort of soak in an atmosphere that sparks your creativity. I think if I just sat in the house every day, I would still have ideas, but when you get away, particularly when you get away to somewhere different, it it really sparks that creative mood.
Hmm. Susan is sort of asking a similar question, but she's wondering if you keep a daily notebook of ideas or sort of, as you come across things in life, make notes of them for future books.
I do have several little notebooks that I will jot down ideas. You tend to think, oh, I'll never forget that, but actually you do. It also helps. My husband, when we travel, keeps a very detailed journal of pretty much everything. So I'm always saying, Charles, go back and look at April 17th in 2007 and tell me where we were when this happened. Uh,
That's helpful.
it is. I have been a journal keeper too for most of my life, but I found that I was getting behind in my journal and it was making me feel guilty. So last year I made some changes in my life and decided that I was going to cut out things that were stressing me out. And keeping a journal had become more stressful than it had fun. So I'm not journaling
Okay,
anymore, but I still have my backup husband who is journaling.
there you go. um, Allie is wondering, name one thing that you are never without.
Hmm. First of all, I'll say my contact lenses because I'm completely blind without them. Um, I am a Coke drinker, although I've been trying really hard to cut that out. Um, I, I travel with a pillow unless I'm flying because I have my favorite pillow. Uh, Now that I have an iPad, I have to have my iPad. I have the Kindle app on my iPad, and I'll confess to Words with Friends. That's pretty much an addiction too.
Oh, yes, that's a must-have. Emily is wondering, do you have a go-to favorite snack when you're writing?
I'm not much of an eater while I'm writing. I tend to use snacks as I'll get up and go get a handful of peanuts. Again, that whole healthy thing. I'm trying to, eat more healthy snacks like a banana or yogurt or peanuts. What I really love, just the other day, I made some sugar cookies, the kind that you ice. We were going on a family picnic for Memorial Day, and there's still some of those in the kitchen, so I'm having to stay away from those. But I'm a pretty good baker, and I like to bake, so yeah, I have a sweet tooth for sure.
Um, Alex asks, you're a USA Today best-selling author. How does it feel knowing that your stories are so widely received by the readers?
My husband always says to me, "How do you know?" He laughs because in the beginning, my first goal was just to get a book published. And occasionally he will say to me, "Are you enjoying where you are at this moment?" The fact of the matter is, once you achieve one thing, you're always looking for the next goal. It is really satisfying, though, to get emails from readers and know that people are embracing the characters that I've made up in my head. That that is really fun, and I'd say really that is the most fun part of the job. Next week, I'm headed off to Cincinnati to a reader event that Lori Foster hosts. And some of the women I met there in 2004, and they come back every year, and I come back every year. It's really kind of a big family reunion for book lovers. So I
Right.
count my reader friends as among one of the special perks of this job.
Great. Last question. Kate is wondering, do you have any future books planned that you can talk about? I know we were chatting a little bit before. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Yes, I'm also, in addition to Minding Her Boss's Business, which is the kickoff book of this Royal Family series, which is multi-author, I'm also in the middle of a family saga about the Kavanaugh brothers. The fourth book came out in April, was called Twins on the Way. It's a lot of fun. The fifth book comes out in August, and then I'm taking a tiny bit of a break and writing some books about three friends who go to Scotland. Very sexy books, funny books. Those will be out in March and May of next year. I'll pick back up with my Kavanaugh brothers. So a lot of books coming out. That's the good news. The bad news is I've got to
Huh.
get them written.
Well, we can't wait to read them.
Thank you. Thank you.
um, that is all the time we have for today, but I wanted to remind everyone to visit Booktrib to enter to win a copy of Minding Her Boss's Business. And Janice, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you, Alyssa. I've really enjoyed being here, and thanks to all the people that tuned in.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye bye.